Who's the guest? Just kidding.
Some random guy.
Friend of a friend. So welcome to the Strength Athlete Podcast, episode 11. We have a very special guest with us today, coach of a couple of our coaches previously, pretty well-known lifter and coach. I mean, he's done some things, and generally interesting person, Dr. Michael Tuchscherer.
Can I officially add that to my list of accomplishments now? Honorary doctorate from TSA.
Yes. If Russia can give a doctorate in powerlifting to Boris, then I feel that we have the authority to do that here.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? It's just some letters. If it happens to spell doctor, that's not your fault.
Yeah. We've got Eric and Chris here with us as well. If you guys want to say what's up.
What's up? What's going on?
And so I think the topic of my water bottle. The topic of conversation for today is something along the lines of, correcting weaknesses and how we make exercise selections. I thought this was going to be a particularly interesting topic to talk to you about, Mike, because I've gotten a couple of peeks into some of your programming in terms of what I see people doing just on social media, and what I know several of your clients, they're close friends, and having taken a peek at what Chris and Eric were doing previously, and I think it was you who's had the discussion on the pendulum before in terms of the popularity of specificity. And from what I remember having seen of samples of your programming from previously, or what would have been in like the RTS manual, versus what seemed to be some more recent examples, it seems kind of like, at least for your own decision making related to specificity, your pendulum is swinging a little back in the other direction. And I'm really interested to know how you make these choices, kind of why, and in general, how you direct your thought process on that. And so I thought it would be something cool to share with people, because it's a little bit out of my own wheelhouse. I tend to stay a little bit more with the, I wouldn't say hyper specific. I'm not like classic DUP, only squat, only bench, only deadlift. I did that for 2 years myself, and I hated every minute of it. But I didn't hate it. That's an overstatement. But it was boring, man. So anyway, suffice to say, it's an interesting conversation at me, at least, and I don't really care what anyone else thinks. Before we proceed, a couple things to touch on. The formalities. Just a quick thanks to our sponsor for the podcast, LVD Fitness. They are giving away free water to people in need for every single item sold. You can find them at www.ldfitness.com. Also, thanks to everyone who purchased a shirt to support the Strength Athlete team traveling to Belarus. We are in process of finalizing the order with the printer now, and you guys should be receiving those reasonably soon. I think there was one other thing. Oh, yeah, leave us a 5-star rating in the iTunes store, because we love you and you love us, and that's everything. So
that's all we got, guys.
Yeah, this has been episode 11, and everyone just didn't talk. Cool. So I mean, let's just open up in general.
Yeah.
Well, kind of where are you at right now in terms of thoughts on how you're. Not get too specific. On what we're going to do, but or on what we're talking about related to exercises, but at least how you make choices in general.
Yeah, well, I do, as you mentioned, kind of the spectrum of specificity. I'm not quite as hyper specific as a lot of other coaches. I think a lot of that comes from my background, like as far as like where I came up in some of my early influences in training programming. I've got a lot more West Side influence than probably what you guys have, and some other coaches and stuff like that. And I carry a lot of that even now in how I do exercise selection. Now it's a lot different from what you would see in a more by the book conjugate approach. But we do train the competition lift. We train it, with a whole range of intensities, from fairly light, say around, we very rarely go below 70%, but even 70% is a bit on the light side, all the way up. So the focus, I would say, of any program has to be on training the competition lift. That's kind of the cornerstone of what's going to provide progress. Now from there, I do tend to move away from that a bit faster than some other coaches do. And I'll include other assistance lifts, lifts that are designed to, emphasize a skill or a range of motion or something that the lifter is maybe not as good at. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a lifter who squats, and when they, on the eccentric portion of the squat, everything's looking good. They get into that bottom position and things are fine. And when they start to come out of the hole, their hips rise a bit. The hips rise and the knees drift back. It's kind of a classic thing that you see happens to a ton of lifters when the weight gets sufficiently heavy. It's kind of a way for us to shift more of the load to the hips. So one thing that indicates to me is that we need to train more of that knee extension torque. So we'll do things that reward that and that, punish, so to speak, movement deficiency. So something like a pin squat or a high bar squat or a safety bar squat, all of those are going to reward that mechanic that you're looking for. And if you fall into that hip rise, knees drifting back pattern, it kind of punishes that mechanic. So it's a way, I don't want to say learn technique, because it's not the same as like learning the technique in the competition lifts, but it's training a movement pattern. You're learning what cues you need to think about in order to maintain the proper position. And also, depending on which exercise in particular we're talking about, there's a bit more emphasis in the movement on making those movements correctly. So you're going to be strengthening the positions and the joint angles that you want to strengthen, and not emphasizing other positions.
Okay, and before we get further in, actually, I want to talk a little bit more about something you mentioned at the beginning. When you say your background was with West Side and your program is a little more influenced by conjugate than people would think. So I think this is kind of a don't get it twisted situation here with anyone listening to this. I don't think Mike is creating standard conjugate programs for people, but
no. And I thought of that as soon as I said it as well. Like, yeah, it's not a West Side program. Like, it doesn't even resemble that. But if you go back, a decade or two, my training looked like that and was much more heavily influenced by that type of training. Since then, I've gone a different direction. I feel like I've learned a lot of new stuff, and I'm writing things that are a lot more effective than what I was doing back then. However, I've retained those components of it that I thought were valuable, namely using assistance exercises and supplemental exercises that target weaknesses, not being shy about moving away from, the highly specific competition lift,
Right. Absolutely. And I think I think one of the biggest influences that I see in what some of your clients are doing is the heavy singles on a regular basis before doing a little bit of volume work. So traditional West Side style, you're going to work up to like single, double, triple heavy. It's just, some arbitrary term heavy. And from there, you kind of back off and do some related work that's going to help with correcting those weaknesses, which is kind of the bigger focus of that, right? So that for them, it's like 5% specific and 95% nonsense. And so that, well, nonsense. that's a little bit of an overstatement, but 95% non-specific, and in some cases very non-specific. Like a cambered banded box squat. That's a crazy movement.
Sure. And I think that a lot of the I don't know how much of it like actually goes on, because like you see some of the more extreme examples of, you know, people doing these movements that are, you know, nothing even close to resembling the competition exercise. I mean, it's not inconceivable to me that something like that could work. It's also not very likely that it could work. I mean, if you found something like that and it did work, it would be certainly an anomalous situation. It would be a situation that you probably would point out to other people and be like, hey, isn't that weird? You know, but
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
think that that's a common thing. Well, I mean, I'm not speaking about it, you know, in terms of what actually happens at Westside. I don't think it's common that those highly non-specific movements transfer well. So let's back up a little bit and kind of lay a little more foundation in terms of exercise selection. The number one thing that you do to drive your lifts forward, to make yourself stronger, is training the competition exercise. And I mean, I know that pretty much all of us do that in the programming that we write. That forms the foundation of the program. You know, and it is actual training. You know, it's not just like, oh, well, I'll do my warm-ups in the competition squat and then I'll add chains, and then I'll do. No, you actually have to train the competition movement as it's performed in competition. Where I would go from there are with assistance exercises. Now, those are like, take the competition exercise and then change one thing about it. You know, so you have a competition squat. Now, if you stop on the pins, that's a pin squat. And that would be, you know, a valid movement in certain cases. But it's when you try to start doing too much, you know, you're like, well, I'll stop on pins and then I'll add chains and then I'll do this other thing and then I'll use a cambered bar. You know, well, now it's so different that the transference is not going to be that good.
You may have just come up with a new movement there, Mike. I've never seen a cambered bar pin squat, but it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, hey, well, you never know, man. I know that cambered bar box squats are a thing, but
oh, they're absolutely. I'm trying to visualize it though, because the cambered bar kind of has that like downward thing.
Right.
So I'm trying. How do you get that onto a pin? You know, you have to have a pin between the two. Yeah. Anyway,
do
sorry,
like,
I didn't
like a block pull with a cambered bar.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh man, that's like a weird deficit. That's weird.
Yeah, that would be weird.
I wanted to ask kind of a devil's advocate type of question.
Sure.
In regards to the squat example. So if we have the person whose hips tend to shoot up with heavier weights or, you know, maximal type of attempts, what would be the benefits to those other squat variations compared to, say, doing the competition lift in a weight range where you can kind of maintain those desired positions?
Well, I mean, that's kind of always the other side of the coin. The reason that I choose to use the assistance exercises is because I feel like further exposure of the competition lift gets you a diminished return on your investment. You know, so I mean, if you think about it in terms of like your training volumes, that first set that you do is where you reap the most benefit, you know, and then every additional set after that gets you slightly less return on investment, you know. And we know that because, you know, if you've never trained, you've never lifted weights before at all, but you do one set, then you can see a training effect from that, you know. But then the further you go, you know, what's the difference between, you know, doing 20 sets and doing 21 sets? Like, well, probably not a huge difference, you know. So the more additional work that you do, up to some point where you're going to have diminishing returns, the more work you do gets you diminishing marginal result, you know. So the reason that I would go with something like a pin squat or something like that is that it's a different movement, it's a different movement pattern, and you get more of the earlier training effect. I mean, it's not exactly the same as like the first set value, you know, it's not the first set, but it's a bit of a fresher movement. It's something that you haven't quite so fully adapted to. And I also think that there's possibly some more long-term benefits, and I'm not quite sure that I can articulate exactly what I mean by that, but it seems that including a variety of different movement patterns, and even, this has less to do with like weakness correction and actually driving your lifts forward, but even including movement patterns that don't fall into the same pattern of the power lifts, doing things in the frontal plane, for example. Things like that seem to be beneficial from a health wellness standpoint as well, and keeping your lifters healthy can be a big deal. So I don't know. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, so the theory would be that it allows you to create a positive training stimulus with perhaps less overall stress or even, less volume so that you can continue pushing forward.
Yeah.
Or a little more of a novel stimulus, I think, as well. And not specifically just well, I guess fresher and novel have the same meaning, and if you zoom out far enough. Something I was thinking that I think is an important distinction to make. Frequently, when you're dealing with someone who's going to come to like RTS or TSA for coaching, if they have a habit like their hips shooting up in the squat, they're not ranked novices, and so generally that can be identified as some kind of strength deficiency, and it's manifested itself as a technique change over time. Whereas if you're talking about someone who's a rank novice, I feel like there are certain cases where simply correcting the movement and kind of forcing them to do what they're doing correctly instead of falling into bad habits can go a long way with that. And that's not to say that not implementing a change of exercise selection there is the right thing to do. It may or may not be. But I think you could make a case for the fact that it depends on whether they've learned the movement incorrectly and just not spent enough time training to understand it, or whether they truly have a strength deficiency, which is kind of what we're looking at here, is that all of these are systems, kind of like a set of chain links, right? And if one of these is weak, your movement looks different than what it should. And that's kind of what we're getting at, I think. Anyway.
Sure. So, well, there's a few things there. Let me start kind of at the end as far as what a movement should look like. I'm a sport coach, coaching lifters for powerlifting. So should only goes as far as rules of performance. If your hips shoot up in the squat, that's not directly causing any missed lifts because it's not against any rules, And so if that's the pattern that allows you to move the most weight, then more power to you. Let's do it. What I would say, though, is that oftentimes when people exhibit those types of patterns, it's not the lack of aesthetic or anything like that you're trying to correct, but it's an indication that you can get a nice return on investment by training whatever that weak link is. So if you have a weak link, that it's got more room to improve, and that by improving it, the overall lift goes up more efficiently. So that's kind of the direction that I would go with that.
You can increase your threshold to when your hips are going to shoot up. If you're prone to that with a max attempt, and you train those more upright squat variations, it's going to increase your threshold to when that happens.
Right. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, yeah, you're using your quads in that lower portion of the squat regardless. So, I mean, even slightly stronger quads, you're just going to get the bar moving a little faster before you kick into that position. That's never a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I think that we should dive in a little more specifically. You've already kind of started talking about the squat, so we can continue playing off of that. Probably the most common deficiency is the one that you identified, where basically the back massively outstrengths the quads, and it's super common. We see that in so many people. And so, what movements you said are not dissimilar to what I use. Typically, front squat or high bar squat are kind of the go-to. Whenever I have someone who is a high bar squatter. Oh, Jesus. Sorry. I'm awake, guys. When you have someone, I always laugh when I have someone who is a high bar squatter, because then, it just takes away one of the fun variations that we could have done.
Yeah. But
beyond that, let's dive in a little deeper. What are some other examples of common exercise selections you would make for people and their deficiencies in the squat?
Well, like you mentioned, I think that's almost for sure the most common one. It's at least the most common one that I see. in the squat, the hip rise, chest fall pattern. I would address that using kind of a three-prong approach for each of the three movement patterns. And you kind of touched on this just a second ago. If you have a novice lifter who is spending almost all their time learning basic movement proficiency in the competition exercises, then obviously that will be the prong that you focus on. But if we're talking about a more intermediate lifter where you're training competition exercise, assistance exercise, and supplemental exercise, then we'll use all three of those to move us in the direction of fixing that weak link. So when they train the competition exercise, they'll need to focus on executing it with good technique. They'll want to continue to push that movement so that they're developing overall strength and driving the whole lift up. But since there are these other two prongs, they can do that. You just don't want to focus on weight at all costs. If this is a thing that you're trying to fix and you have this movement deficiency, then let's fix it. Let's perform that movement correctly. Use a weight that allows you to, to come out of the hole in a balanced way. Then for the assistance exercise, that's going to be some movement that targets the mechanic that you're trying to address or the range of motion. It's an assistance exercise, so it's got very close proximity to the competition exercise. It's just one little tweak. Maybe it's a pause squat or, maybe a safety bar like we talked about just a minute ago. So it's very close to the competition exercise. And you can train that fairly heavy as well. It's typically got nice transfer. It helps you move the competition exercise forward because it is very closely related. And then that third category is a supplemental exercise. And that tends to be something that's not really the same movement, but it addresses the targeted muscle. So in the case that we're talking about, this chest fall pattern in the squat, usually what's going on there is the quads aren't strong enough to move the weight. So it's a compensation pattern. Your knees go back, your hips come up, so that you shift more of the load onto your glutes. So what would you need to do to strengthen that? You would do more direct quad work, which makes sense, right? Like squats are good at developing the quads, good at developing the legs, right? This chest fall pattern is the most common pattern that we see in terms of movement deficiency in the squat. It makes sense, that, well, gosh, most people have weak quads in the squat, well, go figure, So doing things like, that are not necessarily squats, like here, at this point, that's where I would reach for things like belt squats or lunges or split squats or leg press or hack squats, something that targets the quads but isn't necessarily a barbell squatting movement.
Most definitely.
So it's basically using the close variance to address some of the technical issues, and then the supplemental exercises to address the muscular weaknesses.
Sure. Yeah. So competition exercise is pretty self-explanatory. For assistance exercise, think movements, not muscles. And for supplemental exercise, think muscles, not movements.
Right.
How often do you vary the supplement movements or the assistance movements, or do you typically stick to one variation to kind of help drive what you're trying to fix?
Good question, and that's a thing that's changed quite a bit. My preferred way to do it now is to give somebody a battery of exercises, give somebody a program, and let them do that program until we're no longer seeing results from it. So we're tracking the competition exercise, and we have something to benchmark the progress on that. So maybe it's a single at an 8 RPE, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a rep set. Something that allows you to see, is the competition lift getting better or worse? And there are a few different patterns that you'll notice. For example, I would say most people tend to get a little bit better each week. But you'll have some people that, week one, they're, whatever, let's say a 200 kilo squat. And then week two, they might be, 190 or 195. So they'll actually get worse in week two. And then from there, they'll slowly progress and slowly get better. Other people will be stagnant, until the very end of the program. And then maybe those last week or two, that's when they'll see all their progress. So it varies a bit based on the program, based on the person. But I'm looking for that. I'm looking for that progress. And when the progress starts to level off, that's when we change stuff. So we're making more strategic use of variation in these cases.
Just to branch off of that a little bit, how do you determine what's working if you're using a lot of close variants? So let's say, for example, you have somebody bench pressing 4 times a week, which is pretty common these days. It's pretty common to see people benching 3 to 4 times a week, or even more than that. If you're using let's say a different variant each day, maybe one day you're doing close grip, one day is 2 count, one day is pin press, whatever it may be. Those can all be valuable tools, but how do you determine at the end of a training cycle which ones were effective and what to keep in there?
It's kind of I want to say a Bayesian approach. Now, maybe somebody who's a hardcore statistician is going to take issue with this, but think about it in terms of like a mentality, right? You don't know, so you guess, okay? You take your best educated guess as a coach, and you say, I think it's the slingshot that was driving that lift forward. So, all right, that's fine. You can think that. And in the next training block, maybe not the very next one. Maybe you give this some time to rest, but eventually slingshot's going to come back around again. Did that drive progress again? If it did, then that's another, chalk up another win for the slingshot. And you go, you start to develop this picture after a number of training blocks, and you start to go, every time I have slingshot in the program, my bench gets better. And then every time when I take it out, it's kind of doing this other little thing, so you start to develop a picture of what works in that sense, and you can do that from exercises, you can do that from intensities, volumes, and so on. So it's a guess in the beginning, but it's a guess that's based on your experience, and then you converge on a more right answer as time goes on. Because it also, you got to consider that it may not be the slingshot. It may be the slingshot in combination with a long pause bench, and that's going to be even harder to see, and it's going to take more time to flesh out. But the longer you do this and the more data you collect on yourself, the better picture you can paint as far as what is it that's actually moving things forward.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So anyway, we can. I mean, I don't think we often talking more about, or reverting back to talking about the squat anyway. What you're saying about, legs, or rather back outweighing the legs generally being common. I don't think we see a lot of common symptoms that you can associate with the reverse of that. I mean, maybe people who get a little bit of rounding in their spine when they're actually in the process of a squat but stay really upright. But outside of that, I don't know that we have any super easily identifiable symptoms of that.
So like if your hips were weak in the squat?
More if your back was weak in the squat.
For me, if I'm seeing somebody who's like it's spinal erector type deficiency, then I would be expecting to see some rounding.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare though with somebody who's doing deadlifts, I would say. I would expect to see some back rounding. I do see people with what I would term as hip weaknesses, and that's kind of more my default position. Like if you're not exhibiting a quad weakness with a maximal load, then it's probably safe to assume that, there's some hip weakness going on. So we're going to train glutes. But it's, it kind of goes back to what Eric was saying about, how the cycles converge more on the correct exercises and stuff like that over time, right? So you may say, well, this person's not exhibiting a quad weakness and they're not exhibiting a back weakness. So let's train glutes. You know, it's as good a guess as any, right? So let's do that and let's see how they progress. And maybe they don't. You know, maybe that cycle just kind of fizzles. You go, oh, well, that wasn't it. Now, maybe you just picked a bad set of exercises, or maybe there's some sort of confounding thing in there. But it's also probably worth your time to redo your analysis. Like, double check that. Am I sure that that's what I think? And maybe you go back and you see, well, actually, yeah, maybe I could see where, you know, some quad could be involved here. So you try that. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you go, well, yeah, I really do think it's a hip weakness, so let's just try a different set of exercises. So you'll converge on something with a bit of time. You know, you experiment, you're testing your results, you're analyzing what happened, and hopefully converging on truth as time goes forward. You know, now it helps a lot if you have some experience and you have looked at lifters lift, and you can. It helps a lot in terms of being able to make a better first guess. But I would definitely take a system that learns from its mistakes over one that doesn't learn but just makes a good first guess. You know.
Yeah, of course. It's, and you know, I think you touched on a really important point there that a lot of people don't quite understand. That a lot of times exercise selections, I would actually almost all the time, are guesswork. And you know, some people are just going to move that way. Some people their hips are going to shoot up in the squat. You could train their quads all night and day. That is never going to not happen. And it's just how they're going to move. And so, you know, your first guess is to train that, but they may not be deficient there at all. And just the key point that I was making there was that, you know, you don't always have to be right with every exercise selection that you ever make. You're going to miss the mark sometimes. And it doesn't mean that you're failing at training, and it doesn't mean that your training cycle, you know, your training max doesn't go up for 8 weeks. That doesn't mean that those 8 weeks of training have done nothing. It's just your ability to exhibit that strength at maximal levels is currently not showing, which is why tracking things like rep PRs and individual PRs on selections of lifts is important actually for keeping yourself accountable to the fact that you are still making progress. If none of your assistance lifts and none of your secondary lifts and none of your primary lifts, and you're not setting any rep PRs, if nothing is getting better, then it's probably time to evaluate the way that you're doing things. But if something is improving, if your competition bench press numbers aren't going up, but your spoto press is getting better, your pin press is getting better, your close grip bench are getting better, you're setting PRs across the board on all of those, you're probably not messing up that training cycle. Things are probably better than you think.
Yeah, it's a matter of time. You know, it's a matter of time before that comes around. Like I have a saying that, you know, hard training is seldom wasted. You know, even if you could know with certainty that you have this quad weakness in the squat, and you spent an entire training cycle training something else, glutes instead, you know, that additional strength that you built in your glutes isn't going to be wasted. You know, when your quads finally do catch up, you're going to be that much stronger. Now, it's maybe not the most efficient way to go about it. It's not a happy solution in the short term, but it's not wasted. And even if you don't value that, you've got to value the fact that you've learned something about yourself and your own response. You know, I think that speaks for a lot.
Oh yeah. So basically all the decisions we are data driven, which is why, generally speaking, the effectiveness of the training protocol gets better the longer you work with a coach, or the longer you're writing your own programs, because you gradually learn more and more about what you respond to. Let's talk a little more specifically about bench press. I think we've spent sufficient time farting around on the squat.
Before we go, we can use bench as an example, but say, for the most part, for bench, you're not seeing any general deficiencies across the board. Would you use more of a specific approach with that person, or would you still tend to use some variations?
I would still tend to use some variations. I'll have a bit more specificity on the bench for a couple reasons. One is that the deficiencies aren't quite so obvious in the bench. So it's harder to tell to begin with. So sticking with a little bit greater specificity is useful. And typically there's a lot more available in the bench in terms of equipment around lifters, and also times in the week that they're benching. Like Eric, I think you mentioned that it's not uncommon to have somebody benching, 3 or 4 times a week. It is uncommon to have somebody squatting or deadlifting 4 times a week, So there's more slots in the given week to train the bench. So you can kind of get more of both in a sense. So I'll typically train the competition bench, and at some point during the week, there will be something that's highly specific, but not quite the same. So think like a touch and go bench, or a bench, what I would call a close grip bench, but it's not like super close. It's like you come in 2 or 3 finger widths. It's not a huge variation. Like, we're pretty darn specific. So we're doing that, kind of on that highly specific end of the spectrum twice a week. And from there, we'll include some variation. Some of it's targeted at, correcting a weak range of motion. Other things are targeted at other things. And that's more kind of a function of what kind of strategy do you want to employ. Some people get a lot, for example, out of the super loading work, like I mentioned, the slingshot or bands and chains. Other people seem to get like nothing from it, So the strategy itself can be customized to fit the lifter. Do we include a lot of that super loading or not, or is it more of a balanced approach and stuff like that?
I think the training stress on bench is a little bit different too. You can take a competition bench to a set of 5 at a 9 RPE, and that's going to be a similar training stress as if you were to do it with a close grip or something like that. Whereas if you were to do it with a pause squat compared to a competition squat, the competition squat, that's a pretty stressful set right there. So it's just a different training stimulus, and you can push the bench a little bit harder most of the time.
Yeah, and I see that too, like in how I run the stress calculations and stuff for our lifters, that lifters tend to be able to tolerate a bit more stress on the upper body pushing muscles than they can on the lower body muscles. And maybe that's just a function of how much weight is on the bar. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's more inherent to the movement itself, or that one's spinal loaded or something like that. I'm not sure, but
I think there's something to the idea. I think there's something to the idea that it is related to weight on the bar. Just observation, or something that I've observed is that the people that I'm coaching that have 4 plus 500 plus bench presses, they very frequently can't handle the same kind of frequency and volume that I'm going to give to someone who's benching 303 and trying to make their bench press go up into the mid 300s. I've had a couple cases where I've had people start with something like that, and they very quickly burn out. You take a 470-pound bencher and you have them benching 400 plus pounds 3 times a week. That adds up. It gets pretty heavy pretty fast.
Yeah. I would love to tease out some more of the variables on stuff like that. So before we got started, I mentioned to Eric and Chris that I literally last night just got done with the write-up for Project Momentum for this year. And one thing that seemed interesting, well, part of the project this year included an 80% rep test. So we had people perform as many reps as they could with 80% in the beginning of the project, and we used that throughout to make some decisions as far as dividing people up into groups and stuff like that. But it would be interesting to look at, for example, is there a difference in how many reps can somebody do with, say, 80%, very strong people versus not so strong people, heavy lifters versus light lifters. And in fact, I was just talking to somebody before we got started, and we looked at that real briefly as far as heavy lifters versus light lifters to see, is there a correlation? Because I thought there would be. I thought heavy lifters are going to do fewer reps with 80% and light lifters are going to do more. But it didn't really seem to pan out. I mean, it was a loose correlation, but not really anything that you would want to make a reliable decision about. So I thought that was interesting, and does how many reps you can do with a single set at 80% say anything about your overall work capacity? Well, I don't know. It kind of depends on how you slice it. If it does, it's probably not very much. But anecdotally, it seems like people who are capable of higher reps at 80%, they're more of like a rep-based type of lifter. Anecdotally, they seem to be able to tolerate higher work volumes. Now, that wasn't a thing that I was able to really get into and test in terms of this year's project, but I don't know. How does that resonate with your experiences? Like, would you tend to agree or disagree with that? I'm actually curious because I don't really know.
I think in my observation, so actually, which part are we talking about? With regards to work capacity, or are we talking about with regards to bigger and smaller people having higher in number, lowers of reps?
Well, specifically the work capacity piece.
I think it's, when we're talking about experienced lifters, I'm going to keep novices out of this conversation. When you look at someone who can get 12 reps with 80% of their squat max, which is an extreme case, right? And that squat max in that case is probably inaccurate, but it's someone who can get 12 reps with 80%. Odds on they're pretty technically proficient, and I think that's one of the key factors in how much work I'm willing to give someone is how much damage can they potentially do to their body with each individual repetition, and that's an important consideration for a lot of people. So people who can do a high amount of reps and can maintain really really strong technical execution of the lifts throughout the course of all of them identically, I would certainly say that I would expect that person to be able to tolerate more training, whereas someone who can get to 12 but just looks like terrible, I wouldn't be, maybe they can tolerate it, but I think that's kind of one of the people that's tightrope walking in terms of how they're managing their training in such a way that eventually they're bound to get pretty seriously injured. And knock on wood, that's something I unfortunately think is coming for all of us eventually, but and if not a long-term, a short-term, slightly debilitating injury. And you can basically make a list of everyone who's a big name in powerlifting now, and one by one you will check them off over time. It is what it is. How you recover from it is a different discussion entirely. Lots of people come back stronger and better. I would say the majority. So I think that's probably the biggest determinant in my eyes. I haven't really had the opportunity to think about it that way, just because, as often as I put rep tests into enough people's programs, comparing with the exact same percentage, and then to modify their training in such a way to test that, it would feel a little bit self-interested for me to play with that in too many programs, sure. Just because, and of course, like you said, training isn't for naught, but it's maybe not the wise training decision to make there.
That's not the situation that you're faced with right there, right? Like, you're not... Right. The goal is to help people as best you can, not to experiment with them.
Right.
So
as much as the two are often intertwined.
So if I may, let me clear up a bit about like what Project Momentum is and like where it comes from and all that.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
So it's basically, I have questions and we're trying to answer them, and and nobody seems to, like, we all have guesses, right? Like, the question that spurred this year's project was, I was talking with some guys, some smart guys, and they held the belief that how many reps you could do with 80% was an indication of your fiber type distribution, which my understanding is that there's research out there that addresses that question already, but that's not really the interesting part of it to me as a performance coach anyway. The second half of the stated claim was that how many reps you could do with 80% not only tells you about fiber type distribution, but also tells you how you should train. That if you were, say, getting low reps with 80%, that means that's an indication that you're fast twitch dominant and that you should train with low reps. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. Like, how would we try to find that out? So we asked people at large. We said, hey, if you want a free program, I've got an experimental program. We told everybody up front what the deal was, and we got people to sign up, and we ran this program. By the end of it, we ended up with 193 responses. Wow. So a good number of people actually carried it out, And in the first week, we tested 1RMs, and we tested 80% reps. The average 80% reps was like right at 8. So we split them into groups. People who were below average 80% reps and people who were above the average. And then we took each of those groups and subdivided them into a high intensity program and a low intensity program. The programs were identical pretty much, except that one program trained at a bit higher intensity than the other. The low intensity program did include a bit more volume, but they were the same number of working sets and the same RPEs. So they're really closely related in terms of programming. And what we ended up finding out was that actually it was kind of the reverse of the original claim that I had heard. People that scored, say, low reps with 80% were better off if they kind of trained their weaknesses. So if you scored low reps with 80%, doing a program that was more high rep focused, more low intensity, tended to be better for you. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't huge, but it tended to be a little bit better for you. And on the other end of that, if you scored high reps with 80%, then training with lower reps, heavier weights tended to be a little bit better for you, And there were exceptions in all cases, but kind of on the average, that's kind of how it played out.
I think that makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, if you're somebody who's good at low reps and you train with low reps, you're really just playing to your own strengths. Whereas, if you challenge yourself with some uncomfortable volume and some higher rep ranges, you might get a better training stimulus from that.
So one thing that I thought was interesting about this is if you look at which one was it? If you look at the high rep group, so people that can do high reps with 80%, we took some of them and trained them with high intensity. Some of them we trained them with low intensity. You would expect, if you're a believer in the volume hypothesis, you would expect that the low intensity training group would have fared better because their training volume was higher. Not astronomically higher, but it was higher. That's actually not what we ended up finding. The finding was that, of those people who could do high reps at 80%, actually training with lower volumes and higher intensities was better for them. Again, not astronomically so, not enough to invalidate everybody that was on the other side of that equation, but enough to say, like, if you're one of these lifters, like, man, I could do 10 reps with 80%, and I really don't know what direction to take my training. Well, there's a suggestion, maybe you should go in the direction of more heavy weights and lower reps.
I think that was actually and I didn't know what the question was that it was kind of behind Project Momentum. And I know you ran one last year, and I like the idea of basically, because we always have chats running with the coaches from TSA, and so it's oftentimes we'll just kind of pose a question, and it's like, we should run a study on that, and it's just and that's basically what it is, right? You give away free training to a group of people, you could probably learn a lot about a lot of things, and I think we did something similar last year. It was I think it was called Operation Momentum. And, no. But it's certainly always an interesting way to gather information from a group that otherwise you really don't get to tap into.
Yeah. I was talking with Bryce about that. I was up in Denver a week or two ago, and we were training, and we were talking about that. And I know that the way you guys have run your projects is more rigorous than the way that I do it. The way that you guys do it is similar, more similar to what you would see in an academic study than what I've done. I don't think that's necessarily, good or bad. I think it just kind of is. The part of the reason why I do it the way that I do it is because I'm trying to answer a question about a practical environment. So I'm almost afraid to try to control it too much. For example, the programs that we used in this year's project were fairly similar. And if you were in an academic setting, that would be a criticism because, you probably could have, taken more away from the project as a whole if they had been, further apart. But I didn't want to give anybody training that I might not actually give them in real life, So I didn't want to give them like a really fictional program, I wanted it to be plausible. So that's what I ended up doing this time. So it's just kind of interesting to me to be kind of down in the weeds on some of these decisions and kind of you're making trade-offs, well, like if you choose to use the similar programs, that'll tell you one thing, but you won't know the other thing. And if you choose to use the dissimilar programs, that'll tell you, the other side of the coin, but you don't get to know this other thing, so there's always trade-offs associated with it. It's been pretty illuminating for me, more from I guess a management perspective of like putting these things together and running these projects through. Oh
yeah, absolutely. It's not, by no means is it easy to create and deliver training for 190 people and then to have to actually micromanage them along the way. That would be an absolutely asinine amount of work. And but anyway, before we get too far off topic, I think people are probably going to click on this podcast because they want to hear about correcting some weaknesses. So let's at least talk about some selections for bench press and deadlift. And I mean, we can gladly come back to this, but I just want to I want to ensure that we get these subjects onto the recording.
No problem. What I see most often in terms of bench press, I mean, we're talking about raw benching. You're going to get stuck between your weak range of motion is going to be between 1 and 5 centimeters off the chest. Now, I almost said that wrong. I almost said you're going to get stuck there, but you won't get stuck there. You'll get stuck at some level above that. What we're looking for when we're assessing a weak range of motion is where does the bar speed bleed off the most? And usually in the raw bench, it's right there. It's a pretty narrow band right as the bar comes off your chest. So doing things that cause you to practice producing force in that position are going to be beneficial to you. And that's why I favor things like long pause benches and pin presses from chest level. You have to, you're basically just practicing producing force in that position. I've also experimented a little bit with things like weight releasers and bands to some extent, although bands get kind of weird in that application because it's more resistance at the top and it causes you to lower the bar weight. So basically what I'm getting at is one way to practice producing force is through things like long pause work. I feel like that's pretty obvious. You're holding that position, you're producing force in that position, and over time, the adaptation that you make will be that you can produce more force in that position. Another way to go about it is more the intensity method, where you take something like a weight releaser and you use the eccentric overload to kind of enhance the stretch reflex or something along those lines. That's also why I tend to have people do touch and go benches. It's to have them producing more force in that bottom position than they would be able to in a competition exercise. And then the hope is that that will transfer, as you get closer to the competition exercise, you'll be able to transfer that skill over. So that's kind of the volume approach, the intensity approach. That's kind of the way that I go about it in terms of practicing producing more force in that position. From a practical standpoint, things like pin press, long pause benches, touch and go benches. I've even done a little bit of experimentation with like true maximal isometrics in that position, which is interesting. You know, I've had one positive experiment with it, so I need to do some more. But you know, like I said, that hopefully over time, you know, you build up a data set and you kind of converge on the right answer. So far, it's looking positive, but you know, one training block isn't really very much.
Right. It would be kind of beautifully ironic to name the next project momentum when you're actually talking about an isometric where you're not actually.
There you go.
So it's kind of the dad joke lover in me laughing at that. But, okay. Yeah, no, I actually really like the way that you kind of are defining the weak point in that lift there is the point at which you experience the greatest slowdown, right? It's not necessarily where you're going to miss lifts. I would say more often than not with reasonable weight selections, those aren't the places where we see missed lifts. Usually people can get it off their chest and kind of reach that point. This kind of happened to me at my competition last weekend on my third bench press. I mean, I was like this far from locking it out. It was just no gas left in the tank, man. And I got up there and I cried for every single close grip bench press rep that I skipped in training. And which was 0, Alberto, if you listen to this, 0. But you know, those are some good choices. Actually, I'm a fan of pin presses in certain cases. I've had lots of people do them. I like close grip bench press a lot. Just anecdotally speaking, that's one of those things that people tend to do more of, and their bench just tends to get better. And it's kind of one of those things. Yeah. And I've really been liking Spodo press lately. Again, working on acceleration from the top of that point where you're going to be slowest in the lift. And so, you know, from that 1 to 5 centimeter mark, if that's essentially where you're going to slow down the most, you train your ability to speed back up out of there. And it goes a long way, I think.
Yeah.
So, do you think there's any value to determining a velocity profile of a lift to try to see exactly where your weak point is and try to attack that, or is it something that you can assess visually?
I definitely think it's a thing that you can assess visually, but that's also going to be a skilled thing. You know, so if you haven't done it very much, then, you know, using a program like Tracker, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Tracker, but if you do a Google search for Tracker Physics, there's a free program that I believe is designed to teach physics students about physics concepts, but you can use it for powerlifting too, which is pretty neat. You upload a video into the software, and there's a little process that you go through as far as using the software, but it will optically track one point from frame to frame. And then if you scale it a little bit, like I often, you know, use the diameter of a 45-pound plate, you know, that's a known value, that's a known measurement. It's 45 centimeters in case anyone was wondering. But using, you know, the tools in the software kit, you can see exactly where those slowdowns occur, you know. And not only that, but like it'll produce a graph for you that'll show you your velocity curve, and you say, oh, well, this is the point where the bar is decelerating the most. Okay, and you click on it, and it'll snap to that frame, so you can see exactly what position that you're in, at that point, which is often useful in terms of either diagnosing, that you're out of position, a technical error, but also in just kind of visually wrapping your mind around, like, oh, okay, so that's really similar to, a two-board press or something like that. It just kind of helps you put a picture with the concept.
So what would make you choose, say, pin press over, say, just another long pause or even just more volume with the competition press?
Well, I think pin presses give you some different training effects. For example, if I have somebody who's struggling with the bar path, then I think pin presses work a bit better than pause work. There's some other exercises as well, but I kind of use the weaknesses and the movement deficiencies and stuff like that to get me to a shorter menu. They can narrow it down to, 3 to 5, usually 3 to 5 exercises that all kind of do that one thing that we're trying to do. And from there, it's kind of, pick and see how it worked. You know, like, well, I think pin presses will work, so let's do pin press. And you do it and you go, oh, well, that resulted in a nice gain in your bench. So in the next cycle, you probably don't want to do pin press again, so this time maybe you do incline bench. And okay, well, that one didn't go so well. So pin presses work, incline bench doesn't work, you know. And so you start to form that picture as the cycles progress, you know. And the better you are at judging weak ranges of motion and the more experience you have in terms of picking the exercises, I think you get less error. But in terms of articulating why that is, still some work to be done there. You know.
Absolutely. So, moving on to the deadlift. What are your thoughts there in terms of the most common items you're going to use? I find that I use a lot of just deadlifts or pause deadlifts when I'm writing training. I'll occasionally get into like a deficit or some of the stiff leg or the RDL variations, but generally speaking, those aren't a primary movement on any days. And so I'm curious how you're setting that up.
Yeah. Deadlift can be tricky. It's also the movement that probably sees the most variation in terms of weak range of motion. And a lot of that is technically oriented. If you have somebody who deadlifts with a flat back, then almost for sure their weak range of motion is going to be off the floor. And the bar is going to accelerate pretty much to lockout. If you have somebody who deadlifts with a round back, then chances are the bar is going to come off the floor okay, but it's going to die somewhere near the lockout on the top half of the lift. And actually the weak range of motion tends to be from, you know, middle shin, maybe a little higher than that, to knee level. That tends to be where all the bar speed bleeds off. So depending on which, you know, movement pattern you're showcasing, then that's going to drive what I'm going to do in terms of exercise selection. I find that pause deadlifts are pretty much useful for everybody. We can vary what range of movement that you're pausing at.
Mike, if I can interrupt you for one sec, I'm just going to repeat that statement for all of my hateful clients. I find that pause deadlifts are useful for everybody. And
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Not that I need it. Not that I needed verification, but I'm just saying. Saying. But,
Carry on. They're miserable though, man. They are of all the pause variations. Those are the most hateful ones.
Well, it's. I mean, I find they're especially beneficial for conventional pullers, and you know, you're making yourself stop right in that point where it sucks, and it. You know, what are you going to do? It's going to be awful. But carry on.
You see, you thought we were good friends just now, but I'm gonna, you know, ruin it all by giving your clients an out. So if you're looking for an out, here it is. So, I have come across a handful of people, not very many, but some, who find that doing pause deadlifts kind of disrupts their rhythm a little bit. They feel like they're not pulling off the floor like they ought to be in the regular deadlift. It's almost like they've gotten so used to pausing that they're expecting to pause it again, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to keep going. You know, I don't find that happens for a whole lot of people, but occasionally I'll find somebody who, and you can see it too. Like, it's not just like oh, well, I just really don't like that movement. Like, if you do the pause deadlift and they don't like it, and it precipitates a decline in the competitive deadlift, then probably not a good idea to keep including that in the training. No. You know, so you can't just say that, you know, you don't like it. You should be able to see some evidence for that at some point. But, you know, it is an out.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I originally interrupted you. You were just getting into the rhythm of talking about deadlift, and I stopped.
No, it's fine.
Selfish reasons.
But yeah. So with the pause deadlift, you can pause at various ranges of motion. So if you're one of these flat back people that's weak off the floor, you crack the bar off the floor just barely, and then you pause there. If you're more weak in the mid-range, then you pull the bar to, just below the knee, and then you pause there. So it's really a versatile movement. It turns out there are a lot more variations to help the lockout of the deadlift. If your weak range of motion is at the bottom, there's not a whole lot of assistance work options for you. You can do pause deadlifts, you can do deficit deadlifts. People have pretty varying mileage from those two. I know Tom Martin has done some pretty heavy straight leg deadlifts as well. I've not experimented with that quite as much. That would be interesting to mess around with, though. But yeah, that's about all you've got if your weak range of motion is more toward the bottom.
Okay. So I had kind of a case study question for you, Mike, in regards to the deadlift. Say you're working with somebody who's a round back puller and maybe they've missed the same lift in competition a few times at lockout. At what point do you go from addressing that weak range of motion to trying to get them to more of a flat back pull?
That's a question. To me, that's a question of safety. If I have a lifter who I'm coaching who's a round back deadlifter, then I'll at least bring up the issue with them as early as I feel like I can. Hey, I want you to know that you're a round back puller. That's not a guarantee that you're going to get hurt, but you are exposing yourself to more risk. Some people deadlift with a round back forever and they're fine. Other people do it and get hurt. Some people deadlift with a flat back and get hurt. There's no promises, but it does seem like it carries with it extra risk. You should be aware of that and decide for yourself if that's a risk that you're willing to accept or not. That's kind of how I've approached that in the past. And man, converting from a round back to a flat back deadlift is tough. It's not so hard to just do it because I think anybody can strip enough weight off the bar that they can deadlift with a flat back. But that's not really the question, is it? It's how can I break a PR but do so with a flat back? Mm-hmm. And that's hard. It takes a long time and it takes a lot of discipline. And some people never get there. For some people, whether it's just their build or they've got so much training history in this one direction and it takes too long to move the other direction, they just kind of never make it. But that's not to say that it's hopeless. I have worked with people who can make the transition, and I would tackle it like I tackle any other weakness. I would do all my competition lifts with a flat back, first of all, and not allow any sort of compromise on that. A round back deadlift, in that case, is a missed lift, and I would treat it that way. When you are talking about assistance work, at that point I'm looking at pause deadlifts, paused off the floor, because you break the weight off the floor and you hold it there. Now you've got an isometric contraction that is going to reward you if you maintain the proper position. If you maintain that flat back position, the rest of the pull is going to be okay. If you allow yourself to get rounded over, then the rest of the pull is going to suck too. So it's a nice assistance movement to help with that. And then it's not easy to tell whether that round back posture comes from a glute deficiency or a low back deficiency in terms of muscular strength. But the good news is that for most of the exercises that you're going to select at a supplemental level, excuse me, sorry. For most of the exercises that you are going to select at a supplemental level, it's going to train both of them anyway. Think about like a good morning or something like that. It's going to train both the erectors and the glutes. That's why for a long time we all called it posterior chain, because you basically train them all together anyway,
Do we not call it the posterior chain anymore?
Seems to be a term that's gone out of favor slightly. I don't know.
I still use that a lot.
Hey, it's legit as far as I'm concerned, but it was funny for the first, I don't know, however many years of my lifting career, I started like actually training when I was like 12. And probably for the first, I don't know, 8 years, posterior chain was all anybody talked about in terms of squatting and deadlifting. Like, as if it was impossible to be weak at anything else, you know? You always did posterior chain work. You never did direct quad work, you know? Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to a mentor of mine, you know, at one point my squat was stuck and not moving for a while. And like, man, you know, they always say that it's posterior chain, like you need a strong posterior chain to get better at the squat. And I've been training posterior chain for like 8 years now. And like, do you think it's possible that I could have a quad weakness, you know? And I just remember that you idiot look on his face, like, of course, like, what do you think here? Like, who are you listening to? You know?
Well, we're all kind of subject to the opinions of how we're brought up, and
yeah,
it's that, you know, maybe it's a whole generation of people so emphasizing the work in the posterior chain that has gotten us to this point where the most common deficiency in the squat is people kind of pitching forward when they're coming up, getting those knees back and those hips rising and looking at the floor, basically squatting like Ripito teaches. And and that's not a criticism for the starting strength people out there. It's just it's what it ends up looking like. But yeah, it's definitely something we all want to focus on. So with the deadlift, we were saying off the floor, we've got those couple of choices. How about, let's say, and you know, this is actually an interesting second after this. I have a couple of clients who like to pull with a round back, and I find that, you know, something like a pause at the knee or below the knee and kind of forcing them to spend extra time in that range of motion where they have to correct the rounding in their back goes a long way, and a lot of upper back work and etc. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts with regards to kind of correcting that upper half.
So if you're a round back puller and, you know, maybe it's not so dramatic or you're perfectly content doing that and you want to maximize that pull, you have a lot more options. You can do rack pulls or block pulls. You can do deadlifting against bands or against chains. You can do reverse bands. And there's probably more that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. But, I mean, even on its face, that's what, 5 variations, even if you don't count different pin settings and block settings. So, I mean, that's already a lot more than what you would have available to you if you had an off-the-floor weakness. And in general, I'm going to just kind of try one and see how it goes. I do have a slight preference for the band and chain work because it is still full range of motion. It's easy to kind of cheat the rack pulls and block pulls. The whole reason that you're weak at the lockout at the deadlift is because you're in this kind of back rounded over position. So what happens is people start, you know, below the knee or whatever, and they get in this nice locked in straight up and down position, and they go, man, I can deadlift 1,000 pounds from below the knee. Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's not the same position. You know, if you're deadlifting, if the intent of your deadlift assistance work is to train a weak range of motion, and you choose block pulls, and you're deadlifting more from blocks than you are from the floor, that indicates that you're not really training weak range of motion. You know, it's not a guarantee, but it probably means that you're not really training weak range of motion, that, you know, you're getting into a position that you're not normally in, or maybe that's not really your weak range of motion.
I think that's a really actually apt assessment. Playing with some of those, we kind of got to find the one that's such a glaring weakness that you're like, wow, I have to use so little weight to do this correctly. And that oftentimes can be a good indicator. Well,
and we used to, it probably still is a thing, but maybe I just don't come across it as much. People talk about doing what you suck at. You know, like if there's some movement that you're just like really bad at, like I'm so bad at floor presses, you know, how is it that, you know, everybody, so-and-so floor presses way more than me, but I can bench more than him, you know? Well, I mean, it's not a guarantee of anything, but it is an indication of something that might be beneficial to you. And I think that's a thing that's kind of gotten lost in the last however many years. The fact that there aren't any guarantees with almost any of this. You know, you can try it and see how it works out for you. You know, this whole notion of using assistance exercises. You know, like this is something that I've found to be useful, but you have to. There's a bunch of different ways to apply it. There's a bunch of different ways that it can manifest itself, and I don't think it's. If you're looking for a guarantee, you're just not going to find it, you know.
Absolutely, and I mean that's the nature of anything, right? But especially with training, I like to describe it as you're shooting at a moving target from a moving truck, and you have an idea of which direction you need to point the gun, and you get pretty damn close every time. But hitting that target perfectly is pretty damn hard.
And there's a skill to that, even to that thing, like that one thing of writing a great training program. You know, there's a skill component to it, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it.
Oh, we know.
It cracks me up though, man. Like I hear this occasionally where somebody will say, you know, great athletes are born and not made, and I think I get what they're saying. You know, they're kind of attesting to a genetic component to people at the highest levels, but. I mean, if they truly are born and not made, then how come there's never been a world record holder that just doesn't do anything? Like I'd never really trained before in my life, but today I woke up and decided to run the 100 meters and set a world record. Like, so I mean, obviously training matters some, and if training matters at all, then there's going to be some training that's better than others. You know.
Maybe that genetic component just dictates that they respond to more preposterous training methods, and so you can throw anybody at anything. You know, have them walk on a step mill for an hour a day, 7 days a week, and they're going to squat 500 in 6 months. You might find a case. In that case, is it so preposterous? Well, yeah, I guess not. Well, then you get into that. Is it because of it or in spite of it? Kind of.
Yeah.
Argument, you know.
Yeah, but I tend to think, like at least with competitive endeavors, if it's in spite of it, then you're just asking for somebody to come along and smoke you, you know?
Well, yeah. But yeah, no,
I pretty
tend
off
to...
topic as far as exercise selection. So.
No, that's okay. I don't mind going off topic. I just wanted to make sure we kind of got some hits on exercise selections just for the people who kind of wanted to hear about it.
Sure.
But yeah, I think we could probably wrap it up there for now.
Sounds good.
I think we've gotten a lot of fun little details.
Yeah.
So guys, one more time, thanks to our sponsor, LVD Fitness, for putting this podcast on the air, quite literally. You find them at www.lvdfitness.com. Big thanks to Dr. Michael Tuchscherer for...
We're going to really try to make this stick, huh?
Professor Dr. Michael Tuchscherer, for taking a few minutes with us, an hour and 20 actually, and just chatting about fun things. As always, if you have people or things you want to hear about, feel free to write them in the comments, send us a message, let us know. And I am Hani TSA. We got Aydin TSA, Eric TSA, and are you Mike Tuchscherer on Instagram?
Yep, Mike Tuchscherer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you want to know how to spell that, just look up the Reactive Training Systems website. Tuchscherer is like my last name. It's not easy to spell. So yeah, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.
See ya.